Welcome to Module 1, Lecture 1. Today we begin with a very important question. What is a network? Let's look at this closely. A network is not just a collection of separate objects. It is a system made of entities and the relationships connecting them. In finance, that means banks, funds, markets, and institutions are not isolated decision makers. They are tied together through lending, ownership, contracts, and shared exposures. What happens in one place can travel far beyond its origin. Think of it this way. If the pieces of a system are connected, then the behavior of the whole system depends not only on the pieces themselves, but on the pattern of those connections. That is the core idea of network thinking, and it will guide everything we do in this lecture. Now let's ask a motivating question. How did a housing crisis in the United States become a global catastrophe? This slide shows why connections matter. Traditional economics often studied institutions as if they were mostly independent, but the 2008 crisis revealed the danger of that assumption. The map in the center shows financial linkages stretching across major cities and markets. A shock did not stay local. It spread through funding links, liquidity pressures, and hidden channels of exposure. You might notice the phrase at the bottom, to understand stability, we must map the topology. Topology simply means the structure or arrangement of connections in the network. In other words, if we want to understand whether a system is fragile or resilient, we cannot just inspect each institution one at a time. We must study how they are connected. This slide contrasts two ways of thinking about financial risk. On the left is the traditional view, where one institution fails and the event is treated as mostly isolated, or idiosyncratic. Idiosyncratic risk means risk specific to one individual firm. On the right is the network view, where one distressed node in a web of institutions can transmit trouble outward. That is systemic risk. Systemic risk is the possibility that local problems become economy-wide problems because of interdependence. The dashed lines and dense connections in the diagram emphasize contagion, which means distress spreading from one part of the system to another. Think of a spark landing in a dry forest. If the trees are disconnected, the fire stops quickly. But if everything is tightly linked, the fire can cascade. So the shift in perspective here is major. Instead of only asking whether a bank is healthy on its own, we ask how exposed it is through the network around it. Let's now break a network into its atomic units, nodes and edges. A node, also called a vertex, represents an entity. In finance, that could be a bank, a hedge fund, an insurance firm, or a central counterparty. An edge, also called a link, represents a relationship between two nodes. That relationship might be a loan, a trade, a contract, or some other financial connection. The diagram in the middle shows several blue circles connected by lines. The circles are the actors, and the lines are the relationships. On the right, you see the notation G equals V, E. This is the formal way of saying that a graph G consists of a set of vertices, V, and a set of edges, E. So whenever we model a financial system as a network, we are really asking two basic questions. Who are the participants, and how are they connected? This slide adds an important idea. Nodes are not empty dots. They are containers for data. The large circle labeled Bank A is linked to a data card listing attributes such as name, sector, assets, risk rating, and status. These attributes matter because they help determine how that institution behaves inside the network. For example, a bank with very large assets may be more systemically important. A weak risk rating may suggest vulnerability. Its sector classification tells us what role it plays in the broader system. You might notice the term GSIB on the card. That stands for Global Systemically Important Bank, meaning a bank large and connected enough that its distress could have broad consequences. So a node has two layers of meaning. First, its place in the network, and second, its internal characteristics. Both are needed if we want realistic financial analysis. Moving from nodes to edges, this slide shows that edges carry information. Here, Bank A is connected to hedge fund B with a directed arrow. The annotation tells us the type of link, the weight, and the direction. Type tells us what the relationship is, such as an interbank loan. Weight tells us the magnitude, in this case the size of the exposure. Direction tells us who owes whom or how the obligation flows. This matters because financial links are often channels of risk transmission. If the borrower defaults, the lender suffers a loss. So the edge is not just a line on a picture, it encodes economic meaning. Think of an edge as a pipe through which financial stress can travel. The larger the pipe, the more potential damage it can transmit. Here we move to the formal mathematical definition of a graph. On the left is the geometric view, where we literally draw the nodes and connect them with lines. On the right is the algebraic view, where the same network is represented by an adjacency matrix. Let's unpack that. A matrix is a table of numbers. In an adjacency matrix, each row and each column corresponds to a node. The entry A sub ig tells us whether node I is connected to node j. If the value is 1, a link exists. If it is 0, it does not. This is powerful because once a network is written as a matrix, we can analyze it with linear algebra and computation. So a visual network diagram helps intuition, but the matrix representation makes large-scale analysis possible. It is the bridge from picture to calculation. This slide introduces a taxonomy based on directionality. In an undirected graph, the relationship is symmetric. If A is linked to B, then B is equally linked to A. The example here is stock correlation. If stock A moves with stock B, the relationship is mutual. Mathematically, that means A sub ij equals A sub ji. On the right is a directed graph, where the relationship has direction. Bank A lends to Bank B, for example, so the obligation flows one way. In that case, A sub ij does not have to equal A sub ji. This distinction is crucial. Some financial relationships are naturally mutual, while others are fundamentally one way. Understanding which kind of graph we are dealing with changes how we interpret risk, influence, and transmission. Now we add another layer, intensity and weight. Not all connections are equally strong. In the diagram, some lines are thin and some are thick. Thin lines represent low exposure, while thick lines represent high exposure. This is the idea of a weighted network. In an unweighted, or binary network, we only ask whether a relationship exists. The answer is yes or no, often represented as 1 or 0. That is useful for studying topology, meaning the shape of the network. But in a weighted network, we ask how much is at stake? How much money is exposed? How strong is the relationship? That is essential for financial applications like loss estimation or measures such as debt rank, which tries to capture systemic importance based on potential impact. So weighting helps us move from structure alone to economic significance. This slide presents bipartite networks, which are networks with two distinct types of nodes. In the figure, the top row contains investors or banks, and the bottom row contains assets or securities. Links only go across the two groups, not within the same group. That is what makes the network bipartite. Why is this useful in finance? Because sometimes institutions are not directly connected to each other, but they become indirectly linked through common holdings. For example, if two banks both hold the same asset, then a fire sale in that asset can hurt both of them. A fire sale means forced selling, often at depressed prices. So even without a direct loan between two banks, shared ownership can create hidden dependence. This is a great example of how networks reveal indirect channels of contagion. Next, we move to a more realistic picture of finance, the multilayer or multiplex network. The slide shows 3 stacked layers: interbank lending, derivatives, and ownership. The same institution can appear in multiple layers at once, but its role and risk can differ across them. This is very important. A bank may look safe if we only study one layer, such as lending, but it may be dangerously exposed in another layer, such as derivatives. So a single-layer network can miss key vulnerabilities. Think of it like looking at a city using only its roads while ignoring its power grid and communication network. You would miss how failures interact. In finance, institutions interact through many channels simultaneously, and multi-layer analysis helps us capture that richer reality. This slide reminds us that networks are not static. They evolve over time. The notation G sub t equals V sub t, E sub t means that both the set of nodes and the set of edges can depend on time. The 3 pictures show a progression from calm to volatility to crisis. As stress rises, the network becomes denser and more synchronized. Correlations increase, connections tighten, and shocks can spread more rapidly. This is a key insight in financial crises. The network structure itself changes under pressure. Relationships that seem weak during normal periods may become much stronger during turmoil. So we cannot always rely on a single snapshot. To understand systemic risk, we often need a dynamic view that tracks how topology changes as conditions change. One language, many systems. The network framework is not limited to interbank markets. It can describe liquidity flows in banking networks, price co-movement in correlation networks, corporate control in ownership networks, and even physical movement of goods in supply chains. The pictures on the slide show these different systems side by side, but the underlying grammar is similar. In every case, we identify entities, define connections, and study the resulting structure. That is why network science is so powerful. It gives us a common language for many kinds of complexity. You might notice that the meaning of the nodes and edges changes from one example to another, but the mathematical framework stays consistent. That makes network analysis both flexible and transferable. Think of grammar in language. Grammar tells us how words combine to create meaning. In the same way, network grammar tells us how parts combine to create system behavior. On the left are nodes, the actors such as banks, firms, or assets. In the middle are edges, the actions or relations such as loans, trades, and correlations. On the right is structure, the full system formed by those connected parts, including topologies like bipartite or multilayer networks. The key takeaway is written at the bottom. Systemic risk is not just about the health of individual nodes, but about the stability of the connections between them. That is a profound shift. We stop seeing risk as purely individual and start seeing it as structural. Let's finish with a summary from microstructure to macroprudence. This table reviews the main network types we covered and links each one to a financial use. Undirected networks capture symmetry and are useful for things like portfolio optimization. Directed networks capture asymmetry and flow, which helps with contagion and liability mapping. Weighted networks capture intensity, which matters for systemic risk estimation. Bipartite networks represent two-mode systems and can be used for issues like common holdings or fraud detection. Multiplex networks capture multi-layer interactions and support more holistic stability analysis. The final message is essential. Correctly categorizing the network topology is the prerequisite for accurate financial modeling. In other words, before we analyze the system, we must first understand what kind of network we are dealing with. That foundation will support everything we build in the rest of the course.